I kind of resent the name peacemaker.
Tell
us about this resentment, please.
Get angry about it.
Yeah.
Get mad.
I mean, I've seen and experienced online that, like, when I say I'm a 9, someone will come at me and say, "Oh, you can't be a 9 because you're starting shit right now."
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm like, well, I mean, isn't that the fucking point? Like, isn't that what a 9's supposed to be doing, and getting away from being that peacemaker? I think, like, okay, I have to bring this back to relationships, I assume, because that's where a lot of my like growth and experiences come from. So peacemaking in its most honest degree for me is including myself in conflict, because what happens when I don't in the relationship world is I'm forgetting that I'm half of that relationship. I'm getting sour, I'm getting angry, and then peace is really starting to go away. Peace is really starting to decline.
The Big Hormone Enneagram.
Hi, it's John here. I'm a sexual self-pres for the 458 tri-type.
Hi, David here. I'm a self-pres sexual 9 with a 1, 974 tri-type.
Hey, it's Emeka. I'm an 8 wing 7 sexual type with the 854 tri.
Hey, it's Nancy. I'm a self-pres social 3, wing 4, and 369 tri-type.
Welcome, friends and comrades, to another episode of the Big Hormone Enneagram. Our episode today is about the paradox of type 9, the crown of the Enneagram, the dreamer within the dream. And I'm joined today by my friends and co-hosts, John, our fourth way Enneagram Bay, Nancy, our half marathon queen, and David, cult daddy Gravid, and myself, Emeka, the Saint Juice. And also joining us today, we have our special guests, Tara Hillman, a sexual self-pres 9 wing 8, 974, and Alexandra Arroyo Azevedo, a
Nice
social
job.
self-pres 9 wing 1, 963. Welcome.
Nines.
So
You can't interrupt 9s, though, because then we'll feel like we don't matter.
We'll just create a lot of space and let you guys fill it.
Oh God.
And then you don't want to do that either.
That's right.
So we have been looking at the attachment types. We did 3, and we interviewed Miss Nancy a great deal. And then we had Farah on. We did a lot with 6. And so we've been looking at what is attachment and how does it function and operate, and how does that contribute to 9ness and the behaviors of 9. And, you know, there was a couple weeks ago when it was just David, Emeka, and I, and David was asking Emeka and I about our tri-type 458, 854, whatever, which is a kind of a contrast to the attachment types. So I started this inquiry of looking at, you know, like one of the things that has come up in groups a lot has been 4 versus 9, and how come they're so easily confused by people that just read descriptions, and what is actually going on inside the attachment types that distinguishes them from, you know, any other type, but especially like 4 and whatever. And I know that we have at least 2 triple attachment types, Nancy and Alexandra, and we have the variations of 9 instincts. So does anybody, any 9 want to respond or comment on what I just said?
Silence.
Alexandra, you first.
Oh, geez. So to be more specific with the question, are you asking for why a 9 can mistype as a 4?
Well, I'm curious about how you experience nineness, and then how nineness is related to being an attachment type, and what that means for you experientially, and then we can get into like theory about it.
Mm. How do I experience being a 9?
I mean, I know you used to identify as a different type, and so I don't know if that contrast or that leads into it for you.
I mean, the withdrawn aspect is the most obvious one. I originally mistyped as a different withdrawn type, not a 4. Quite proud of that. Um,
Uh,
but I mean, it was 5, so it's not that far off. Um, but yeah, it was the withdrawn part. I do have with 5 specifically. What I was what I originally saw myself in was the withheld nature. I guess just being um, yeah, a little bit removed. A focus on composure was a big component for me too. So in order to see myself in 9, I had to see all of those represented in different parts of my type, and ultimately it was and is. But
What is composure?
just keeping a level head, I guess. Just keeping like just a calm demeanor in the face of things that would be stressful.
balance.
And that's something that I thought was particular to 5. Obviously, very incorrect about that. But I didn't originally see that as a 9 trait. I thought 9s were just naturally calm the whole time and not like hiding the fact that they were not calm.
I see. So it was a way of um, masking is probably not the right word, but of somehow dealing with your inner not calmness was to present a calm persona.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
Why?
and that's why what?
Why did that feel important to you, or why did that feel like a useful strategy?
What being calm?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. We've talked about it a lot in the chat that I just have personally, I have a lot of insecurity around it looking like messy or erratic or, like disorganized or anything like that. And also, I think just presenting that way only adds to the stress of whatever situation is happening.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of aspects to it. Also, like I can't think clearly when a lot of chaos is going on. So my number one strategy becomes to, or ends up being, trying to calm myself down as much as possible so that I can think of something because everyone's panicking.
Why has it become hard for you to feel clear inside when stuff is crazy around you,
um,
or what's the experience of it?
I feel it in a physical way. Like I
Mm.
feel like my chest kind of tightening up, or sometimes like like heat starts to rise up a little bit, and I guess this is where the anger part comes into play because I do feel um yeah, just like I don't know, maybe it manifests as like an irritation that people
Hmm.
can't keep themselves together, but I don't know if that's I
And
don't know if I'm
it's
saying anything there.
well,
Yeah,
and
totally.
you're talking about sort of body impressions, right?
Hmm.
So it's so you're you're having an experience, if I may say, of the whatever the chaos is around you, in it's flush through your body, right? And so that's a particular, actually pretty powerful kind of sensitivity. It's an oversensitivity, right?
Hmm.
Because you're spreading yourself into everybody that's around you, that is the chaos and the whole environment and the energetic chaos of it. You're becoming one with it at a
Hmm.
body level, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Can you guys say something about how much relating to emotional sensitivity or just sensitivity in general contributed to you thinking you might be a 4 or a 5? Tara, can you say something about that?
Um, yes, I would say that I I identified as a 4 because I do experience anything subtle in the field around me, any type of emotional shift, I register very strongly. And I think that is because as a 9, I'm so wired to feeling the environment around me. I'm so um, attuned to the feelings of other people that any little thing that happens, I've experienced in a huge way. Whereas my other 4 friends are like, that's not a big deal. That's not a big deal at all. But I'm like, well, that was an emotion. Like we all felt something just then. And so I think the way that for me as a 9, small shifts are registered in a very large way. And so I identified as being a feeling type when actually, after discovering that I was a 9, I realized that that isn't exactly how it was happening for me. I am much more instinctual, and I tend to know things rather than feel things.
Mm.
I didn't have that distinction before. I had always thought that as I was registering shifts in the room, that it was all emotion and feeling, and that I was this deeply feeling kind of very porous person. But I think it was more just registering instinctual, even somatic shifts in the room.
So that's super interesting. Can
Yeah.
you say more about that distinction between feeling and, you said somatic shift? Would you call it sensation, or would you call it intuition or something else?
I would call it. I think I'm experiencing it on a somatic level. It's a very instinctual. Um, it's almost like walking into the room, and instead of feeling everybody at an emotional level, it's more um, it's more primal than that. It's literally
Mhm.
a somatic connection to the people around me. But I think that also has to do with being a sexual type. And so there's an awareness somatically. I think that's very heightened for me as a 9. But when I enter a room, or whenever I am with other people, I think that a lot of what I'm feeling is based on a somatic level, and I experience that. It would almost be intuitively, but when I slow the process down, it's not necessarily intuitive. It's instinctual. It's in the body. That's how I'm picking it up.
It
And I
has
think
a
that's why I differentiate between, that's not what I'm feeling, that's what I'm sensing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sensing it in the body. And
feelings
I
have.
used to
Go ahead. Sorry.
I used to confuse that with feeling. And I don't think that's feeling anymore. I think that's that 9 instinctualness.
I think of it as feelings and thoughts have articulated words around them, right? Whereas the 9 experience is nonverbal, right?
hmm
So it's a whole other kind of base of operations.
I feel it's rested deeper than emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it's like if when I'm operating at emotion, it's different. But whenever I'm sensing and feeling, it's what's rested beneath that.
Alexandra, do you relate to what they're saying?
Yes, I especially what Tara just said about feeling that it's deeper than emotion. There is more of a sort of innate knowing sometimes, and I think that's why it registers. That's why that knowing registers so physically for me. So if I could go back to like my original typing, I did originally type myself as a 5 with a 4 wing. So, and I think that I was, and my justification for it was that I do like feel, emotions strongly, but I'm kind of zipped up about it. And I'm wondering now if that is even the case, because I relate a lot to what Tara is saying.
One thing I wanted to throw in real quick too is that the word knowing has come up, and that's a word that to me is a good word around the gut types, right? Like it's really obvious with 8s and 1s that there's a whole lot of quote unquote knowing going on. Like they overly know how everything should be done in any given moment, right? They know the way, right? So part of being a gut type is this sense of knowing that's unconsciously, deeply unconsciously emanating from your body, right? And so with 9s, the knowing is a kind of knowing about what's happening in the environment with the people and the energy in the room. There's a knowing, right? And that level of knowing, just as it is with 8s and 1s, it sort of doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need words, right? It doesn't need an argument like the head types need, right? And it doesn't need specific emotional definitions and the nuances of, you know, the subtle interminglings of different kinds of emotions. It's just you're actually sort of musically resonating in your body with some kind of tone.
I really love how you put that, David. I kind of look at it as being attuned to the somatic truth.
Attunement.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like a somatic truth that just sort of pervades,
Yeah.
and being attuned to that, being able to drop into that.
So in inner work, Gurdjieff work and all that, difference between feeling and sensation is like a huge hurdle for, I mean, first of all, it's a very basic practice, and surprisingly, very few spiritual traditions emphasize sensation very much. Or if they do, you have to really dig for it. It's not like a basic practice or one of the beginning practices. But Gurdjieff work, it's a major thing, and it's in some Eastern traditions as well. And most of the time, what people think they're registering as feeling is actually some form of sensation. And a lot of what we call emotion is just um, reactions to things going on in our bodies. And so it's interesting to look at, um, this sense, this quality of sensation that we're finding in nine together, and how it's related to feeling and emotion, and how it's easily mistaken for such. But how, as y'all are saying, it's like deeper. And as a 4 with a 5 wing, what you guys are talking about feels very distant. So it's very interesting for me to kind of like even the three-way conversation y'all are having is really interesting from the point of view of like, as my narcissism is like, oh, I'm deep, and then you guys are like, well, it's deeper, and I'm like, where are you going? Where is this? But one thing I'm curious about or interested in is something that we've talked about in the group a lot. Naranjo, you know, attributed different defense mechanisms to the different types. And I don't give a shit about all the defense mechanisms or anything, but it's an interesting jumping off point because he attributed introjection to 4, and I don't think introjection is at home or related to 4. And I think the attribution of defense mechanisms to types is a little bit artificial because we all use them. But I think introjection is a much better description of what 9s do unconsciously, where part of in my experience or my understanding, is that the attachment types, they're attached to situations, objects, and people that offer the protective function that our parents played and the nurturing function. And so as an adult, there's a part of the psyche that is outsourced in some way to the environment. And I think that introjection and all this stuff is describing the way that kind of openness and receptivity to the environment is really, really big in 9s, and how a lot of their emotional stuff or sensation-based stuff is being absorbed in some way from the environment, and how, like, in contrast to other types, 9s are incredibly absorbent. Does that fit y'all's experience?
Definitely.
Sure.
I would just say about the introjection part that to me is where a lot of times, first of all, my family is the one that told me my type. They said, you're a 4. And I think that's because I had this 8 wing that was constantly dramatizing things. But I introjected a lot of the the judgments that my family put on me, being dramatic, and that's where I internalized a lot of this shame. And the more I learned from my 4 friends, the more that, I see that they wouldn't have taken that on so easily. And as a 9, I absolutely took that on. And then I began to think of myself as a very narcissistic, self-absorbed, dramatic, temperamental person that needed to constantly try to manage their emotions better. And that was, I think, a huge part. Would that be an example of like the ultimate introjection?
Totally. I mean, like what you just said is taking things on. Like So I am one of Tara's 4 friends, and we are good friends, not on the internet, but in person. And in the conversations we had, like, I don't really take things on, so to speak. I don't really internalize things easily from my environment. And that was something that seemingly came up a lot for you, right, Tara?
Hmm. Definitely. Yeah, and it was the seeing the difference between that, how easily I would take something on, and then I would take it on to the point that in my writing and in everything, my whole identity was questioning these things that I had internalized that other people had put on me. Whereas John would have, handled this completely different. But for me, unpacking all of those internalized projections has been a huge part of my life, and I don't see my 4 friends having that issue.
Alexandra, you relate?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I'm trying to think of like what exactly I've been taking on because I don't even think that's something I've considered very much, but I'm sure that that's part of where that original identity of being a 5 came from. Is I was always told that I was quiet, like relatively bookish, keeping it together, kind of like images like that fit with 9 wing 1 very well. But I was also, when I found the Enneagram, I was also like suggested to look into 5 first. So, and then I took tests, of course, and that I think with that already being in my head, that's where it came up pretty highly for me. And yeah, so I mean, even now, finding 9, it still is. How do I say that? It's still, I guess, a challenge to speak to people that know me as a 5 in their heads that I'm actually a 9 because I don't know how to contest like their perceptions of me. Is that saying anything?
So one thing I'd throw in about that is that there's the flip side of the coin idea, which is that a lot of 9s, because they're so absorbent, are going to make a point of finding a wall if they can inside themselves, so to speak, or like literally withdrawing so that they're not taking on
Mhm.
other people's stuff,
Yeah.
or finding some kind of internal mechanism to stop this absorption, like because
Yeah.
because 9s are a gut type, and so there is this autonomy thing. So that's a weird contradiction of wanting to not be swung around by all of the energy flying around in the room, so to speak, and the fact that it's a reflex, right? And so you might find some internal resources, so to speak, to just stop that as best you can, and that might be easier too to some degree with sexual last 9, and I think that might be some differentiation with you and Tara and what you're describing. Because like I'm SPSX, and I think there is an element of the SX maybe kind of intertwining with at almost a close level what's going on for other people, and sort of possibly being lured into that, even though it's perhaps not to my own benefit or calm or peace or something, but you're being taken into it, kind of. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I
It makes
noticed.
sense.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I mean, I was just gonna say that yeah, I do feel
Don't want to interrupt the 9s. No.
is that I do feel strongly that I either go into what is suggested for me all the way. I'm sure being triple attachment adds to that also.
Yeah.
But if something is placed in if something's sort of attached to me by someone else, I have to consider that fully. And I almost have to experience it fully in order to know whether or not it's true for me. And if and of course there's the other side where if it's suggested like too hard or suggested by someone I don't like or don't have respect for, then I completely push it away. And of course it's not direct either. My way of pushing it away is just taking myself out of the equation completely.
That was interjection, that first thing you described. I
Yeah,
mean,
definitely.
taking
Yeah.
it in completely and having to question yourself, is this me?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Alexandra, I think you're an 8.
Okay.
thing I was going to mention about 9, like sort of the paradox or contradiction that's inherent in it, that to me is similar to 6, in that 6s are doubting but also trusting at the same time. And so 9s are absorbing, but they're also resisting at the same time. So
Yes.
you can't, a lot of times we say that 9s will take on or absorb things and take on other people's perspectives, but it's kind of yeah, I'm really considering that, but I'm also actually resisting that. So you
Mhm.
don't ever know if a 9 is actually taking it on. They don't know, and so it's kind of unpredictable, kind of like 6s. You don't know what you're going to expect if this person is doubting, or maybe they're trusting and they're doubting at the same time. For me, my experience of 9s and in all the years of watching typings go on is that 9s will seemingly take things on that they didn't actually take on. They were resisting the whole time, or they actually fully took it on and they went into that completely, and then they lost it, slipped away, and they took something else on.
Or they resent it. The anger
Yeah.
comes up that they did take it on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they'll take something on and they'll just stick with that thing that they've taken on, and they'll resist anything else that's suggested outside of the thing that they've already taken on. So I see it as a sort of a paradox between absorbing and resisting at the same time.
Yep.
I really like how you
Exhausting.
put that, because that's I really identify with that. Somebody will present something to me and I am very diplomatic. Um, that's I have a very receptive personality, and I'm diplomatic about. Oh yes, I heard that, and there seems to be a lot of times a consideration of that or of whatever's been suggested, but actually there could be an incredibly strong internal resistance.
Mm.
And then what will happen later is, if I felt like I lost some of my autonomy in that interaction, if I wasn't able, if I went past the line and I did go along a little bit more than what I meant to, then later what happens is that wall comes up completely, where that person may not even know why they have suddenly been blacklisted from my life, or
Mm-hmm.
like there's no interaction whatsoever that happens after that. So I think in some ways it can appear that a 9 is taking something on, or that they're going along with something, while the whole time underneath that their experience could be like, nope, this is what's not happening. This is absolutely what is never happening. All the while, like smiling. Oh yes, let's revisit this conversation later. Sure, okay. You have a nice day.
Cold-blooded.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Nancy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I've been like super sniffly. So,
You are mated with a 9.
uh,
You have been mating with a 9
Gross.
for some time.
yeah, I have been. That made me like a bug or something. But yeah,
Got a
So-
succubus.
exactly.
Have
Yeah.
you experienced what our 9 friends here are speaking to?
Yeah.
Being
I
absorbed
was-
and resisted at the same time.
well, yeah. I was gonna make a few comments. It is kind of like you never quite know what you're going to get. Trying to put this in the most diplomatic way.
Don't
Don't
do
be-
diplomatic.
Yeah, you can just
don't.
say it.
Rip
just
them
say
apart.
it.
Okay. Well, my 9 boyfriend's in the other room too. So
Oh.
He's absorbing all of this hate.
I don't
Or
think
he'll resist it. He'll resist it.
I think he's involved in his video game, so I doubt he's even knows that I'm talking. Yeah, so you never quite know what you're getting. So for me it can be quite hard to read a 9 because
No.
it thanks. It seems like y'all have the same outward reaction a lot of times,
To
whether
everything.
whether you're resisting or not, and it almost seems like that's like a way to control like
That's right.
other
That's a good
Yeah,
word.
it
To
is.
control.
because it's
'Cause
like,
there's
oh,
the
well,
autonomy.
if they don't know if I'm resisting or accepting, then I can decide if I'm resisting or accepting. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
it always kind of feels like not walking on eggshells, but just like checking in a lot.
Aloof is a power play.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mhm.
Yes.
Aloof.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I noticed
People
that
wonder.
as a 9.
Go ahead.
I noticed that as a 9, I'm one of the ways I navigate is I don't reveal my emotional location a lot of times to people, and that is one of the ways that I
Yep.
do control my environment.
Yep.
And so and also in the same breath, I from the people in my life, they often have to invite me several times in order to share that experience. But that is a natural thing for me, is not to reveal the emotional location, which is also interesting because people think I'm an open book.
Yeah, see, that's
And
what I was going to say. Yeah.
It's laughable. It's
Mhm.
laughable.
So, what happens if you reveal your emotional location?
It's just such a private and precious experience for me, because I do, my experience for me is incredibly personal. I write it in a diary, and I have a diary practice every day. So all of the things that I'm holding, I give a lot of value to. And so as a 9 too, constantly feeling, maybe erasing myself, or being sensitive to other people not holding my experience in a valuable or precious way. One of the ways that I've learned to navigate life is simply, I'm not going to share this part with you until you've really, really earned it. Because the disappointment and the hurt and the betrayal that I'll feel if you don't listen to this, if you don't know how important this is that I'm revealing to you, the disappointment will be crushing to me. And so I've actually had prepared to have important conversations where intimate partners even didn't know that I was revealing something to them that for me was very precious. And I felt their attention shift, and I just trail off in mid-sentence, and it's never to be discussed again. Because what I had to say was so precious to me that I couldn't bear another time to put that information out and it not be held.
To me, an aspect of that too is that as a 9, again, going back to this sort of body base of operations, is when you tell somebody something like what you're talking about, you actually want them to have the experience of it, right? That you want it to be something that resonates in their body. I mean, you want it to be that fully, that's the standard that you have for somebody hearing you.
Yeah, taken in.
Yeah, taken in. You want, it's not just
So you want another 9 to listen to you.
Yeah, it's basically, yeah, exactly.
But what Tara, what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but just to see if I'm hearing you, what you're saying is that sometimes you'll present something that's really intimate, but in a way that the other person doesn't understand or doesn't hear how important it is to you, and so that you'll kind of midway kind of abandon selling it or abandon describing it because they don't get it, and so and you can see that they don't get it, and so you just kind of give up on it. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And it's a way of self-erasing too. So there's always like a level of shame that happens afterwards. Like, oh, I couldn't communicate my experience again. And this experience is too precious. So I can't risk this person having heard it and not getting it, if they can't meet me here in this place. So then there's not revealing the emotional location becomes a pattern.
That's that's really interesting because on one hand, I could see that being very difficult for people who are partners with 9s to understand, and something probably 9s don't even realize they're doing. But in contrast to just my type, it's like, this is my emotional location. Okay, it's right here. Get with it. Come on board.
Fucking experience this.
This is it. Eye contact now. This kind of thing.
And if you don't listen the first time, they'll make sure they repeat it until you do.
Yeah. Over and over and over. This is important. The narcissism and stuff.
And for me, I'm like, I'm gonna let you in on a secret. This is what's happening for me. And for me, it's like that big of a deal, like a secret that I'm sharing with someone. This is what's going on. It's almost like want to whisper it to them. And if they don't get it, then it's like that, the voice trails off and it goes back into the box. It's not to be, we're not going there again. You don't get that anymore.
It seems to me like it's always a big deal for nines about being seen, like stepping forward and being seen. So maybe in a romantic relationship, like I'm revealing this thing to my partner, and if they don't receive it with the amount of weight that they're not making as big of a deal as it is for me as a nine, that I'm stepping forward and it's such a big deal for me, and this person isn't reacting or they're not receiving it the way that I would hope, then it's like, I guess I don't really matter, so I'm just going to drop this. I should have never even said
Right.
anything.
Exactly. It's exactly like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it,
so
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you.
So,
No,
God
you.
damn it.
I insist. I
Thank
couldn't.
you.
I couldn't. I'm sorry.
So, Nancy's original question, what happens if you give away your emotional location? So I relate largely to what Tara's talking about. There's another aspect for me that I'm also controlling, not having to deal with the reaction of what happens if I give
The
that
ripple.
away. Yes. So a lot of it for me is, okay, if I know, sometimes I don't know, but a lot of times I do know that this will not be received well, or it could be sort of what Tara was talking about, kind of dismissed or not like revered as much as I feel like it should be. So in order to avoid that feeling of dismissal or that feeling of rejection or just the overwhelm. Okay, so to put it more clearly, I'm going to withhold how I feel about a situation in order to keep you from sort of blowing up at me, because then not only am I not seen, but I'm having to deal with your issue that you're giving to me now.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
You're absorbing,
and then
I get their reaction.
Yeah, and then it becomes me doing sort of double work. Like, okay, well, fuck whatever I had to say, and also now I have to care about this, and I shouldn't have to.
Why do you have to care about it?
I mean, I guess I don't, but it becomes,
because it's resonating in my body.
Yeah, now it's something that I'm feeling now, and that only makes me more angry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
sorry, David, but you take it on without really permission. Like it just comes into you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's totally a reflex. Where I was going to go is, Tara, the word secret, right? So like other personality types would just be being themselves as opposed to having a bunch of secrets, right? So it's like there's all this stuff that we're not saying all the time. And so then it's a big deal to let this one thing out, right? It's a secret, right?
Yeah.
And I'm letting you in. I mean, and even that language is letting you in on, right? So there's that kind of intertwine.
In my experience, I'm having a deeply revelatory thing happening for me a lot of the time. And so to share any little bit of it, it becomes, my inner world is a very secret, precious world. And it takes a great deal for me to let someone in on that. And the people in my life are often very oblivious to that. And it goes back, I think, to what Nancy was saying too, is that there's kind of like a poker face aspect to nines where you really just don't know what's happening with them. And there's a like a calm exterior, but below that and deep within that, there's, for me, a very revelatory aspect. And as a nine, that's often what I wish I could communicate to people, or I wish that the people in my life were very curious about that. But it takes a lot for me to reveal that location that I'm living at.
You know, one thing I've noticed about nines is they're hoping that people aren't paying close attention, because, to be honest, it's not truly possible to hide your reactions. Like, I mean, there are all these little tells. I think most nines they have a calm exterior, but you can if you're looking closely, you can see the reactions. And so for someone like me, like a sexual ache who's, like paying demonic attention to someone. So like I've dated a bunch of sexual last nines, which are really hard to read, but when you're staring at someone very closely, you can notice that.
See their eyelid twitching with rage.
That's really the truth, though. That's actually the truth. So sorry, I'm gonna hijack this for a second. Is when Sebastian and I, my partner is a 7, self-press 7. When my partner and I are in an argument or like some sort of conflict or anything like that, and he's telling me where he stands, he'll just be and suddenly his tone will switch because I did something apparently to let him know that I'm not there. I'm not like with him, resonating with him anymore. And he'll stop like mid sentence and be like, oh, wait, is that fine? And then I have to check in with myself and be like, shit, what did I give away? Is that fine?
I know that conversation well.
So I'm just trying to say that y'all nice think you're being poker faces, but it's not. You're not really.
No, great.
Especially with partners who've stayed with you a long time and have learned your tells. It's written on your face, and especially because 9s are somatic types, the body does not lie.
Well, I'm gonna repress myself even more than now.
I also want to say
harder.
Yeah.
There's few things as pleasurable to me as being found out in the moment. So when there's a partner that can perceive that subtle shift that just happened, that to me is for, I mean, maybe for all sexual 9s, I don't know, but that right there is like an erotic ecstasy. Mm-hmm. Being found out, being caught. I know that sounds a little bit strange, but when somebody perceives like, oh, that's what's happening with you right now. And especially if there's even like a little bit of a confrontation around it where that experience gets invited forward, that's highly erotic for me as a sexual 9.
Damn, erotic.
Yeah, I relate to that a little bit. I don't think I would call it erotic, but I do feel it as
yeah, you
comfort.
would.
I do feel it. I do feel it as comfort. I do feel it as like, oh, you see it and you care. Like, wow, what do I do with this now?
Well, it kind of sounds like the 6 experiencing like the worst case scenario. They're like, oh, well, it's here now. I've prepared for it, so we're good. Nothing worse can happen.
So I guess you guys are saying that being paid really close attention to is really important. It's a turn on and it's comforting.
Yes.
Taking notes. I'm just taking notes.
How to get a 9. That is the goal of this podcast. How to
get pay attention.
Just so y'all know what I'm trying to do here.
So that's a whole other kind of being seen too. You know, that's not the typical being seen way we think of that phrase, right? That's like being seen at a really sort of subtle level, and it's again a body level, right? Because there's an energetic shift. You're saying you want that other person to perceive that shift, right?
So how would you all distinguish this from an image type being seen?
Well, how would you distinguish it? You're an image type.
I don't know.
Good question.
Flipping it back on
Look
him.
At this girl.
This is not what I signed up for when I wanted to talk to a bunch of 9s.
John was just going to roast all the 9s.
Yeah.
My answer was going to be that I have no clue. Like, I have no clue how to answer that. So, yeah, let's focus on John.
Tara just revealed my emotional location.
Ding, ding, ding.
So I mean, it's sort of like when it comes to the 9 space, there's intuitive quality that I understand 9, but then a lot of the direct experience stuff you guys are speaking to, it's like I get it conceptually and intellectually, but like the felt sense of it is hard. So I think an image type, there's 2 levels. On one hand, I actually don't want to be seen. On the first level, like you know, there's shame is underneath the persona or the self-image of image types, and so you know, I don't want what's underneath to be really seen. Like I want little qualities of it to come through in how I'm expressing myself and acting in the world, but like there's a lot of just feeling like I'm shit. But then on this other level, like being seen is like it's related to intimacy, and I'm not saying that the body type thing is not related to intimacy, but it could be. I just don't know. But the being seen thing is like yeah, it's like it's definitely like a heart based sense of being deeply intimate and met and known, and when you talk about having a heart to heart with somebody, kind of that thing, but it's more than that. It's like it's not merging, but it's like some kind of deep encounter, and that's where like being seen comes in. So I don't know how that sits with y'all's experience of being seen.
So to add to also being an image type, right?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yes.
My brain like blanked for a second. I was like, wait. All right. Anyway, so also being an image type, being seen and met is terrifying. But once you get to that second level that John was talking about, it's almost for me like being held as a child, like in a very very
Mm.
um primal intimacy of like this, like being held as a small child, like it's a heart experience. I don't know how else to put it, but that's what comes up for me.
Yeah, I resonate.
I would say that my experience with image types versus nines is that nines, they want to be. It's almost like I want someone to pay attention to my somatic reactions. Nines are putting a lot of signals that I don't like this through sort of a body communication style. And as an eight is something that I pay attention to the somatic environment as well. And so I think I get the sense that nines want me to pick up on these nonverbal cues of their internal state and know, okay, she doesn't like that. Let me move away from that topic that I'm talking about because she just moved her elbow this way and looked the other way. Um, Whereas image types, there's a lot more about mirroring that's going on where like they're presenting an image to me and saying, this is a fragment of myself. Do you resonate with it? And so it feels a little bit more about intimacy and about like mirroring. And it's more about, I don't know, it with nines, it just feels like you have to pick up on these sort of um, little cues that are suggesting something going on inside. Like you really have to pay attention to the somatic communication. It's very nonverbal. Whereas image
Well,
types,
it's a doorway. That's the way
Mhm.
I experience it, is that all
Mhm.
of that somatic information is a doorway into the deeper experience.
Yes.
And I may not even be conscious of all of the emotional, mental garbage that's going on, or whatever it is. It's like all of this information mentally and emotionally can be there, and a lot of it's fleeting, and a lot of it's just arising, abiding, passing, whatever, it's just swirling there. But the somatic experience, all of that is already happening within it. And to me, that's what's trustable. So my first response to something is happening in the body. And so when a partner is relating to me through that somatic language, often I reach the truth of my conclusion much quicker.
Hmm.
And so to me, that's why the body is so powerful, like that language, because I'm not always aware of all of the emotional context, but my body is. It's registering whether or not, whether I feel safe, or whether I feel opened, or whether I feel connected to someone. It's there, and it's an undeniable experience. Whereas the emotion and the mental stuff is, swirling. And when I'm
That's
with,
super.
and
Sorry, go
Mhm.
ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, please.
Well, that's just super well spoken, and like bringing up for me like a lot of the difference, like from not just nines but body types in general. I feel like there's wanting to be on a certain level. You call it merged, like some of the words we're using is like attuned. There's vibration and resonating, and and being on a similar kind of body level wavelength of sharing in the same matter in a certain way. And even with eights, it's like you need to meet eights where they're at. It's like you can't hide and go, oh no, like you have to like you meet them with a certain kind of energy for them to feel you. And so but what's an interesting point you're making, Tara, is that you're not always aware of all the stuff going on, but there's always stuff going on. And like, I think from an image perspective, it's like there's almost too much seeing, whereas like it sounds like on a body level there's like stuff going on, and it's like sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. But on the image level, it's like you're seeing everything way too in focus and clear, and whether it's your own states, other people's states, whatever. But it's like there's something different qualitatively in what I'm calling seeing that is it's just a very different place.
Right, because for me, the image stuff is almost just distracting, and like we're and to get to the intimacy, we're trying to get to that somatic level, and that's where I think we're for an image type, if going into the heart, particularly for 4, would be like, how can I get beneath all this image swirling stuff to rest into the heart?
Yeah, it's all heart. Yeah,
the sensory correlations are interesting. Seeing versus resonating and hearing and vibrating, right? I mean, seeing is sort of like I don't know, almost a still picture of a special moment of connection, let's say, right? It's like the mother child looking into each other's eyes, and that's a moment of a specialness, right? There's a special moment right there, right? As compared to sort of the underlying beingness, let's say, that is the eternal truth of the connection or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at the differences in what, for example, sexual types that are image types. I've dated a sexual 3, and the experience of dating a sexual 3 versus a sexual 9, for example, and what those types are insecure about, or how they express what they're insecure about. And for me, it always felt like the level of self-consciousness that I experienced with a sexual 3, because it felt like there's me, there's her, and then there's this giant mirror that she's brought with her that that she knows that I can see, and she's always asking me if I'm okay with what I'm seeing, and she's self-conscious of what's going on in the mirror. And it's so, like, my experience with 9s is that it's really about the experience. I'm a body type, so it's all about the experience, and we can just swim in this experience together, and we don't have to talk. And it's almost like there's a little bit of a not there-ness, and we're just in this co-experience that we have together through our bodies. Whereas with image types, it's not necessarily just about the experience. It's about this image of, what does this look like? What does it look like for me to be with you? These characteristics that you have are friends. What do you think about this aspect of my life? I'm afraid to tell you this thing about me. And
what are all the images saying about me?
Yeah. It's really interesting, and to the different things that the image center versus the body center prioritizes, and how that changes what people get really insecure about.
Yeah, and it took me a long time, like probably the first year of me and my boyfriend's relationship, to be okay with just sitting in the experience. And there were many times in the first year of us dating where I was constantly asking, like, is this okay? Like, what are you thinking? What's going on here? Why are we just sitting in silence? And yeah, so it's interesting kind of getting like a peephole into you guys' mind that I don't normally get. So thank you for sharing.
I
Eh,
I really love the image of the mirror that you brought into the relationship, that with the
Yeah.
sexual three. I
Yep.
think that that's really spot on for what it's like to be with an image type.
And it's important to make this distinction for anyone who's listening, who's thinking they might be a 9 versus a 4 or an image type, that image center and image center orientation, and how vastly different that is from being a body center. It's a completely, entirely different universes.
Yep.
Yeah, and adding to that, like I think it's easy for people to get the sense that image means picture.
Hmm.
You know, like, oh,
Mhm.
this is the good picture of a relationship, or a good picture of this, or this is the picture of me I want you to carry around. And it's much more three-dimensional than that. It's not like a picture or it's like, I don't know if this is a useful contrast, but in mystical traditions, they always talk about like layers of the heart, and it does feel like there's layers or stations. And so it's like I want you to get it at those levels, or to be able to make contact with those levels. And so in a sense, there is that frozen quality. It's not frozen, not the right word, but there's that image thing. It's like what David was speaking to before, that it's not as like this undulating, resonating kind of thing. It's it's where we're seeing from and together.
One time, David, I know this was like a description of how threes relate to the image. So I know it doesn't relate to all image types, but David once put it as threes feel as though there's a camera on us all the time and we're constantly performing for it. And I don't know if it was like just self-pres threes. I don't really remember what you said, but that resonated with me. Like at all times, I feel like there's a camera, and throughout my entire life, constantly feel like there's a camera. Like consciously, I'm aware that
Mm.
there is someone watching.
John, do you resonate with that at all?
No, I don't resonate with feeling like there's a camera or some kind of performance, but there is like a camera, so to speak, a lens going on in my inner life all the time.
Okay.
Like my impressions, it's like under under extreme examination, like microscopic examination at all times. And then from image or from whatever, there comes interpretation and meaning assigned. So like I think, like I paint, and um I think that it's kind of like kind of like a useful way, at least for me, to think about images is in terms of the way painting becomes a certain kind of sensibility or meaning. That's not so much a concrete like snapshot. It's like the colors in a painting all evoke something, and everything is in relationship, and the contrast is in a certain something, and it evokes something, and it's not always something that you can name or verbalize or articulate, but it's kind of more like thinking about painting versus music, which sounds like music seems more body centered to me, just in this metaphor.
Is one word that I'm wondering might fit sort of for what you're talking about, John, is the word story-esque, right? Like it's to what the images, it's not flat images. I mean, it's stories that are more, as you said, three-dimensional, like a story would be, like does that, I don't know if that's getting at it.
Somewhat, I think of it more like mandala kind of image, like
Okay.
that there's these sort of layers and interfacing things, and like I even think in terms of images, and so it's like but sometimes they're like highly abstract, but they kind of come out of the void in a certain way from.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyways, back to 9.
I'm lost in everything that just got said around, the difference between, like the painting versus the music. That really struck me. And how the image types, almost there's an invitation to, I want you to engage with this painting. This is my greatest work of art right here. This image that I have so carefully constructed, through all my observations, I have created this performance for you. And now I want, I'm inviting you to dance with this. And I want you to feel the music through this painting, through this this art that I created for you. And I find that a lot of times in my experience with image types that I'm attempting to meet them in a place of like, oh, that's an amazing thing that this is amazing art that you just painted, that you just created. Now what happens if we move that aside? What's behind the painting, or where did the painting come from, and let's touch that place. And that's where I think I lose a lot of the image types, and they're like, okay, see you later. we've had enough. we've done enough here.
There is a sense of creativity that I like that you're touching on, that like and again, it's just like reaching in an abstract space, but like the creative process of self or something that if you can join me in the creative process, which is like on a different wavelength than the sort of body center stuff we're speaking to.
Yeah. Can you dance with me within this character, this painting that you said that I've crafted to communicate who I am? But that, like, it seems that that's really important to them.
And the narcissistic aspect is like, this is an amazing fucking painting.
Look at how amazing I am.
Behold myself.
That was funny.
With the senses too, again, I think of so image types, obviously it's eyes, and then for 9, I think of it as like the whole body is an ear.
Yes.
Yeah, the whole body is an ear. So the whole body, that's taking, just like an ear is taking in vibration, taking in that gets into music, da 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 da, right? So frequency and so on, and it's it's got that. It's in some sense it's not functional relative to image, is because it's an ear.
Yeah, the whole body is listening.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
So I did have an experience. I had an ex who was an image type. He was a social 3. So I've been thinking about what you guys are saying, and it does feel very much like that, where our relationship was a lot of him asking me to admire what he has created, whereas from my angle it felt more like me unknowingly asking him to dig to see that I am that already. Is that making sense? It's there's no, because I don't really relate to the crafting. I relate to finding it within myself that it's already there. So it's more maybe to move with the metaphor that Tara was talking about, that it is the door. I need someone to walk through that door, or to like dust it off or uncover or dig or something like that. It's there. I don't know how to bring it forward myself. So please come find it for me.
Just like 9 relates to generally beingness. So you're looking for what already is.
I want to be recognized. Maybe it is 9, but like the way that I relate to being, to needing to be seen, is I want to be seen for the value that I'm not actually showing.
Wow. What's striking me, what you guys are saying is the inner need for 9s for someone to help bring them out of themselves. Like someone who's going to help me uncover myself. I know it's here. Someone who recognizes that there is hidden treasure underneath this calm exterior, and is going to help me uncover what's already there.
Yes.
Yeah. Help me reveal myself.
So then something that brings up for me is so how do we contrast that with what we call self-absorption for 4s?
That's what I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean, David?
Well, I mean, we talk about, like, one of the ways we're always knocking off all these 9s that think they're 4s is, hey, you're not self-absorbed enough, buddy.
But there is a sense of self-absorption with like all the 9s that I have met. Like They're very self-absorbed.
Yeah,
Right.
there definitely is like a specific flavor of narcissism and self-absorption to 9. I don't
No.
think I really know how to differentiate it from 4. Maybe that it's just not surface, that it's not forward enough.
Well,
I don't know.
one way to say it is that the 4 isn't doing the constant receptivity of the whole environment and everyone around. So that's one way to say it. 9s are doing both, right? Let's say.
It
Well,
seems that. Go ahead, John.
Well, one way I would think of it is regarding like whatever we were joking about earlier, where I was like, "This is how I'm feeling." You know, the self-absorption is like these are specific important states, and like I'm gonna hold them in your face. You know, like you're gonna see them.
Yeah.
And whereas the self-absorption of 9 tends to be a little bit more passive and a little bit more like,
Yeah.
like I want you to come after it. I don't even exactly know what I want you to come after.
Yeah.
Whereas like the 4th thing, it's like even if I withdraw and I want your attention, it's like I fucking know what I want you to see. Like
It's
I want
super articulated.
Yeah.
hyper articulated. Yeah.
Maybe 9 is more diffused in that sense too. Because
Yeah.
I do relate to what you were talking about, or to what you just said, and like I don't really know the kind of attention I want, but I know I want something, but
And-
I don't. But it's please figure it out.
It's my whole being. It's my whole being you're supposed to absorb. Or
yeah,
yeah.
it is.
That's
Yeah.
a big ask, guys.
Right. As opposed to the 4 thing, John's saying, no, look at this exact thing right here, this line.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, 4s are extremely hyper specific. Their yeses or nos are specific. They have all these self-specific preferences. So you're never going to be dealing with the 4 and not knowing where they stand. It's like they hate this, they hate that. I don't like this, I like this.
Yeah.
Whereas 9s, they're going to be like, oh, I don't know. And I don't know, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like an invitation for you to be like, well, what about this? And what about this? And so they can be like, well, I think I might like that. And then you just sort of spend the rest of your life trying to figure out what they like.
I don't resonate with that as much.
God, I resonate with that so much.
They just want unspecified attention.
So the
Tara,
attention part, yeah.
Yeah, Tara, I'd imagine it's different, somewhat different. Sexual first, possibly, is more articulated interest.
Yeah, I tend to do, I do know more. I feel like I have a good sense. It's just, am I going to reveal it? And do I feel safe with that person to tell them? And so it's the quality of the attention. How deep is the attention and how sincere is the attention will determine if I'm able in that moment to cross that great, threshold for me and actually reveal, this is what I want. This is what's happening for me. This is what I'm feeling. So I feel that there is a specificity. I do know what I want a lot of times, but I can't communicate that without that quality of attention.
Also, when someone's, saying, do you like or dislike this thing, the 9 sort of has to go into your body to find it, and your body doesn't have any words, right? So I've got to find it in my body and then translate totally abstract sensate impressions and maybe hopefully come up with words. And that's a process. That's a slow process, for one thing, right? I mean, it's not an instant thing like it is with thoughts and vision, right?
I do relate a lot to that, David. And that's why if someone's being very sincere and the attention is very present, then I can come up with that information quite quickly. Because I'm also dropped into the space. It's, I guess I relate more with, that I don't know stuff whenever I'm in a more superficial moment with someone. And then I'm also kind of checked out and not listening to the body's internal data.
So, I know that we have a limited time left, but something I wanted to return to or touch on before we go is sloth and as the passion of the 9. And I was interested in what y'all were saying in terms of, like, Tara used the word precious and secret and the sort of sensitive, sort of, I don't know if safe is the right word, but kind of like a safe either inner world or a safe place that can be reached when the outer environment is safe. And then Alexandra, you talked, I think, about having difficulty giving permission to what enters your boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And those both feel connected and related to sloth to me in some way. And I was wondering if either of y'all had, and David too, if you had anything about that.
First of all, she should give a definition for the people. What is sloth?
Yeah, who wants to do that?
You.
On-
All right, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Sloth is kind of a self-forgetting.
It'll
It's
take
like,
us too long to say
yeah, true. Sloth is this sloth is traditionally defined as laziness, but it's not lazy because you can be quite active and still be slothful. But it's a way that I self-forget or I give up on myself prematurely. And one of the ways it shows up in 9 specifically is a kind of inner fragmentation. And there's a sort of a sense that I want this essential sense of harmony, but I need to self-delete or self-negate or self-erase at least different parts of myself that are not going to be congruent with my experience or might feel disruptive to the experience I'm having. And so it's sort of like I'm abandoning parts of myself. And the suffering is the feeling that I don't really matter, I'm not really needed or wanted or seen. And I allow myself to sort of half exist. And so it can manifest as, anything nine-ish, whether it's going along with stuff that I don't really feel like I agree with or give permission to, or it can just be kind of living my life through the motions or not really examining my choices in a certain way. There's a lot of different manifestations, and if there's any I lost that you think are important to add, go for it. But yeah, anyway, I was interested in touching on sloth and the experience of it.
So for me, a lot of it is just like putting it off. I have a lot of, it feels more like a procrastination for me. Like I do know, and an issue of how am I going to meet my potential? How much work is that going to take? Or is that possible at all? And I'm sure maybe it's different with me being 3 fixed than Tara and David having a 4. But a lot of it is how am I going to bring this forward? That sounds like a lot of work. I'm going to do it later. And also, like taking in the suggestions of other people, or kind of like not sitting with myself long enough to figure out a plan of how to get there. I'm not sure if that's saying much, but a lot of it doesn't feel like forgetting. For me, it's more like just holding the intention, but not being able to get up and make it happen.
So that's interesting. So like, again, we're contrasting a lot with 4 because 4 is and 9 are often mistaken in descriptions for each other. But like the 4th thing is to hyper specify and over differentiate. It's like to get overly clear about what's me versus something else and separate myself from something else. Where it sounds like what you're saying is sometimes you'll allow something to come on board in your inner life, or like earlier, like you use the word not giving it permission or something, but it still comes in anyway.
There's I have a lot of resistance towards getting specific with something because it feels like what if, a lot of it is what if for me. If I commit to this very niche, very specific thing, then what if I find out that isn't where my potential lies, or that isn't what resonates most truly for me, and it's actually in this other space that I put off in order to pursue this specific thing. So it's wanting to keep it open because I don't know where it's going to be.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I was going to say, one thing that's interesting about like the word harmony that comes up around 9, it's a really good sort of essential quality is like the analogy of music again, a lead singer, and then you've got the harmony, the singers that sing the harmony, right? And so the 9s kind of are oriented around, I mean, of course, in literally speaking, there are plenty of nines that are lead singers, but as a personality type, nines are sort of harmonizing with some other lead singer, figuratively speaking, right? And so you're sort of not finding that central thing that is your lead singer, right? And you're doing all kinds of elaborations on themes that the singer might be doing, and sort of not getting to your own central self-differentiating core that is your own melody line that actually others might get on board with and harmonize with you on.
I
Yeah.
resonate a lot with that. I was actually thinking about this earlier, and I made a note of it that for me, what the sloth looks like is I begin to sense that my life is being whip cracked. It's sort of almost when I find myself running around and sometimes being whip cracked by life almost to the point of exhaustion, trying to make all these things come together, and I lose my sense of self-possession, and I lose my inner compass about what I need to be doing. So it's almost like the opposite of laziness. For me, it looks like me being super busy, taking on a bunch of demands of other people and trying to create harmony in all these places. And it erases me. And so my own lead singer, my own inner voice gets eclipsed because I have gone into a default mode of trying to create harmony often for, my environment, for other people, having a hard time saying no, things like this, trying to constantly caretake. And so whenever I know that I've gone into a sloth or the self-forgetting, it's always with a sense of being whip cracked by my environment instead of being in the driver's seat, standing in that sense of authority with myself.
Yeah, nines are usually busy people, actually, even though it's a sloth type.
That's an important point to make, because a lot of times people avoid recognizing their own nineness because they think it means that you're just a lazy couch potato that doesn't do anything. But a lot of, like you're mentioning, a lot of nines are so busy running from one thing to the next, and you're spreading yourself so thin that you lose all sense of yourself.
Yeah, I lose my authority. It's like the self-possession and self-authority is gone. And I'm now just this kind of puppet of life trying to fulfill all this bullshit that may not matter to me at all.
One thing I wanted to make sure that we hit on is the topic of conflict. And a big misconception with nine, they call it the peacemaker. And some of that is true, but just I want to hear from you guys. What is your experience of conflict, and what is your experience of this sort of misconception that nines are always the peacemakers or always after peace? I guess how do you make the distinction between dealing with conflict and your own sense of balance?
I don't know. I can't go first on this one.
Yes, you can.
Yes, we can.
Do it.
I mean, in a way, I kind of resent the name peacemaker.
Tell us about this resentment, please.
Get angry about it.
Get mad.
I mean, I've seen and experienced online that, like, when I say I'm a 9, someone will come at me and say, "Oh, you can't be a 9 because you're starting shit right now." And I'm like, well, I mean, isn't that the fucking point? Like, isn't that what a 9's supposed to be doing, and getting away from being that peacemaker? I think, like, okay, I have to bring this back to relationships, I assume, because that's where a lot of my like growth and experiences come from. So peacemaking in its most honest degree for me is including myself in conflict, because what happens when I don't in the relationship world is I'm forgetting that I'm half of that relationship. I'm getting sour, I'm getting angry, and then peace is really starting to go away. Peace is really starting to decline. So the idea, I don't know, the idea of peacemaking being this, you kind of have to keep yourself quiet in order to keep everything harmonious. That seems to be the overall assumption. It just, I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me. I can develop this farther. That's where it's starting for me.
I really like that, Alexandra. Like you said, that you're part of this equation, and part of keeping the harmony and the peace is to be able to be participating in the conflict and paint yourself into the picture and show up, because that's the opposite of sloth, right? That's showing up and saying, I'm here. This is the emotional location. This is what's happening. This is what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Right.
The times. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah. That's to me what I heard you saying.
Yeah. The times that I have been at my most engaged in the most conflict has been after prolonged periods of time where I was, peacekeeping, so to speak. So it feels false.
Yeah. I relate with that.
And the way that nines peacekeep, is that just basically not showing up, not doing anything, just letting things roll over? Or is it like more of a, people sometimes imagine that it's an active peacekeeping. Oh, I'm going to be the one. Yeah, like a mediator.
I mean, it has been that, but most of the time where I've experienced myself peacekeeping is just taking myself out of the equation. It's just kind of what I was speaking to earlier, of saying that I'll withhold my, I won't reveal my emotional location so that I don't have to deal with another person's reaction, so that I don't have to deal with the conflict that will come from that. And that's false. That's false peacekeeping.
What about tone policing?
Oh,
Sore subject.
A very sore subject. Yeah.
That should be the name of the type 9. Don't call it peacemaker. Call it the tone police.
Tone police.
Oh my God, yes.
So I've been looking at that. I've been trying to observe like when that happens and what I'm really doing when I start to do that. And I've noticed that when I start to do that, or my mom is also a 9-wing-1, so she basically fucking trained me to do that. But I noticed that when it happens, particularly with the two of us, it is because we're trying to get away from we're not trying to touch the subject matter. We're trying to keep it as far away as possible. And so it just distracts, it just totally derails the actual substance of the argument so that we don't actually have to deal with it. And then that's what happens. We end up forgetting about it, but then it comes up later.
So for me, the shadow form of the distorted form of 9, whenever there isn't presence, is to let things just roll over and to let things slide. And that would be like a distorted version of peacekeeping, because it's false. It's not real. But I think the high side of 9 is where the 9 does show up and they paint themselves into the picture. And because they're able to hold the experience of everyone, and they're self-possessed enough to articulate their experience and be curious about other people's, then the real power of the peacemaker comes in.
Yeah.
Because this isn't someone. Thank you. So I would say that that's how I see the high side of 9 in terms of the peacekeeper. And I would also say that my relationship to confrontation or to anger, when I was a little girl and a teenager, I was intensely angry. And I was very connected to it, and my family knew I was very connected to it, and I didn't have any filter with it, actually. So later, the default and distorted version of 9 started showing up on me, where I let things roll and I let things slide, and sort of started erasing myself as kind of, I lost my self-esteem and my courage and my confidence and all of that. Then the distorted version started showing up. During the journey more of healing, what I found was that reconnecting to the anger and allowing that life force, almost, I identify it as like the bloodlust of the 8. When that energy starts going in me and it's not in its distorted form, but there's an honesty with it, it's highly alive for me. And it actually feels really good. But that's only if it's coming forward in more of a way of anger, is letting me know what I don't want. And it's challenging me to show up and paint myself into that experience. So I would say that anger for a 9 is like a really beautiful thing, actually. And because a 9s are so much of a peacekeeper, when anger is whenever I contact anger, and then I'm also curious about other people's experience, a lot of good stuff can come from that. It doesn't have to be this explosive, volatile, kind of homicidal 9 rage. It can be like, and I've had
Lit.
those, I've definitely had those, and my family has,
Your family is dead now.
They're in the
all dead to me.
basement. No, their bodies are in the basement.
Well, so
She's not denying it.
Notice she didn't deny.
Oh my God. Sorry. Anyway.
we've come through a lot of evolutions together, my family and I, and I think like what's really important for me now is that like the anger, I often don't feel it, or I don't allow myself to feel it, but when I do now that I'm in a healthier version of myself, it's powerful and actually feels really good. Lets me know what I don't want and gives me energy to do stuff. Like I get up, and it's also life force. It's erotic energy. It's all of that. It's, So I think it's important for 9s to not deny that experience and to try to tap into it at a somatic level.
I wanted to ask y'all, how do you feel that the Enneagram world or literature or posting or whatever at large, how do you feel that 9 is mischaracterized, and how would you, what do you think is not really well understood or needs to, where does the focus in terms of trying to describe the inner dynamics or just the personality features of 9 need to shift to? Or what is unrepresented generally in 9 descriptions, any of that stuff?
Well, to me, it's a lot of stuff around creativity, and including conceptual creativity, and just an easy way to talk about it, I guess, is just certain well-known people that are 9s, Carl Jung, and you know what I mean, and certain musicians and so on. Just that it gets mentioned occasionally that 9s are creative, but the number of 9s that are influential creative people it's a significant number. It's not just kind of maybe some sort 9s here and there. It's kind of a lot. And so I've of course 974 triple crazy fantastic creative, I've got a lot of ego invested in that, so that's part of why I'm saying all that. But anyway, that's a major, but again, also even conceptual creativity in areas that go into the sciences and psychology and so forth, to me is something that doesn't get emphasized enough. And one thing too is there's almost a poetic sense of why there is all of this misunderstanding about 9. I mean, it makes sense in a way that there would be. I mean, as a just the metaphor of 9 is this kind of vast ocean wateriness of non-distinctness is part of the essential quality of 9, right? So anything I might want to say about everything I just said gets in some sense energetically dispersed, right? And it doesn't stay in clear form, right? And so I don't mean to sound like we're doomed, but there's that quality of that is actually part of the energy of 9 is the non-clarity of 9, right? And so clearing up misconceptions is it is a bit of a project, and people are going to have to really see us. Anyway,
So much work.
Yeah, a lot. I mean,
A
it's
lifetime of work.
oceans,
You
depths.
guys expect a lot of us.
Yeah, and we want to be seen fully through and through.
But also, you don't want to be a burden. So,
Well, cross some oceans for us.
but not if it's a burden to us.
But only if you want
No,
to.
But only if you want
I
to.
No, I'll put that burden on you, Nancy.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't ask for it, so no thanks.
Tara and Alexandra, do you have any things you want to say about the misconceptions or descriptions of 9 that?
I think David covered a lot of them. I think maybe some of the manifestations of anger, like what we give our permission or what we give ourselves permission. Well, maybe not permission, but how it sort of leaks out. Like I think some of the cattiness and the fussiness and just like the general bitchiness sometimes just isn't talked about. And I've heard that people, because that's represented in, or I don't know, just talked about in type 4 or 8 or 7 or even 6, that people will see themselves in that. It's in 9 too. And
Yeah.
it's not talked about at all.
Secret critic.
Yeah.
The tone policing is a big aspect of like the style that 9s go at, how 9s go at each other or at people. The aggression of 9, it comes out in that sort of.
And by tone policing, we should define that. It's like no one should be mean to anybody. No one should
have an
disagree.
attitude.
Yeah, like I get it all the time. So like like especially online where I say something that I think is like plain or whatever, but it's a little bit contrary to like a popularly accepted view, and then it becomes about you shouldn't have contradicted the authority on that part of the Enneagram, or
or they'll go after like your etiquette in
absolutely how I said
how it was said. Yeah.
Completely avoiding what I said. Or how dare you do this? Or if you say that a lot of people are probably actually 9s, then this and this, or it's like these kind of things. I mean, even politically speaking, it's like, I'm very outspoken in my political views, and so I don't think I'm rude about them, but I'm just straight up. And then it's like, well, that's a very mean way to say that thing I agree with.
Yes, I apologize on behalf of all of them and us.
I will hold it against you, but
thank you.
I'll say that an unfair thing about 9 is that 4 gets labeled creative type, 5 is labeled the smart type, and so 9 often is like blank.
Yeah, we just get nice, and that's nothing else, and like I personally, I don't feel like I'm that nice, so I don't know.
Definitely not nice.
Definitely the CQ.
CQ.
This sort of benign bubblegum image that people have of 9s is not true at all. I think. I mean, it can be that 9s can be doormats and they can be just agreeable and all of this, but that's just like the shadow version of the peacekeeping. That's definitely not where all 9s live. There's a broad range, and I think for a lot of the instinctual types, there's this sense of self-autonomy and authority within, and they can be forces. They can be really seated in what they do want, and I don't think I think this blanket image of 9s who are kind of lazy, benign, and just agreeable is one version of the 9 that's on autopilot. And when they're connected to themselves, I think, and when they're fully online, they're anything but that.
I agree.
Cool. So you heard it here first. You heard it here first. 9s are jerks.
Yes.
Thank you for listening.
There's a massive thread right now on one of these, what is it, Enneagram Place with about this 9-1 dude that's supposedly like a big jerk to everyone. Like,
oh yeah.
Did I just sound like a jerk? Is that what?
Yes. I mean, out of all of us, the most controversial over the years, the most controversial forum poster is our very own resident 9-1 self-pressed sexual David Gray.
I've been sort of at the forefront of some of these of several of us getting kicked out, and of different groups.
David just being like, yeah, well, I just think 9s are more creative than you think. And Harry's like, no,
the biggest asshole. Biggest asshole of the group is a 9.
and like the real mastermind behind the not a 4 thing is a 9.
Yes, right. Like relentless, daily, weekly.
Oh yeah.
And
I'm just in David's like way of speaking, like I'm just gonna find the thing that's gonna annoy the most people.
That's it. Well, and that's a good one. That's a good shadow thing too. I mean, good is who knows what. I mean, but,
God.
shadow. I mean, right. So in context with people in person, of course, there's the smooth 9 thing going on for me. So of course there's. And it happens actually, I'll say, especially a lot of male 9s, although there's some women like your friend John um, that are actually relentless, antagonists online. I mean, and they're and actually the 9s are the worst. I mean, and by a significant margin. I mean, like it's worse than the quote unquote crazy reactive 6s, right? 9s are just because they're stubborn, right? And they know.
Yeah,
Right.
and they
The
know
most stubborn.
because it's coming from that deep knowing. Universe place. Yeah.
Yeah.
You heard it here. 9s are trolls.
Yeah.
Later, good night.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mike Cross.